Welcome to the Art of Black Miami podcast, organized by Greater Miami Convention and Visitors Bureau. Our stories introduce emerging and experienced artists who make Miami an exciting place to live and visit. I'm Rosie Gordon-Wallace, curator and arts advocate. Miami is my home since the 1970s. My passion is cultivating the vision and talent of contemporary artists from the Caribbean diaspora, artists of color, and immigrant artists. Many cultures and languages come together to shape the character of Miami. Today we introduce you to Thom Wheeler Castillo, an artist of the moment. His eco-sensitive printmaking, sound art, and cultural tours engender respect for the environment, history, and poetry of the place he calls home. Thom Wheeler Castillo, so good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Today I'm asking you about your early years. Share that with our audience and so we can get to learn more about you.
Well, my mother is from Ecuador, and my parents met because my grandparents were missionaries in Peru. My dad, he was, I think, 10 to 13 when they did that. When he was 18 and he was going through his rebellious stage, he would run away. My grandfather would find him in Texas and Oklahoma. They were at the time living in Kansas. And at one point, he was 18 and he flew to Ecuador because they had friends from those days who were living in Guayaquil. So at 18, he just runs off to Guayaquil, where my mom's from, and somehow fate connected them, and they were married within months of meeting each other. My grandparents actually flew to Guayaquil to try to stop the marriage, but it ended up working out in the sense that I believe I was conceived in Ecuador, but born in Kansas shortly after. But that was not going to work out for my mom. By the time my sister was born, a year and a half later, it was clear that she was just not made for Kansas. The cold, the weather, her English at that point. So she felt very isolated. So it was clear we had to find another place to live. So I lived in Kansas till just about 4 years old. And then we moved to Panama because my dad got work at the Army base. So I actually started school in Panama, kindergarten and first grade. I started second grade, and then we moved back to the States because the buzz in the Army base was that Noriega was becoming a problem for the United States. A lot of the civilians left. We moved here in 1987. I was 7 years old, and I started halfway through the school year at South Miami Elementary. But those 2.5 years, from age 4.5 to about 7, which I think are really crucial in childhood development, left a powerful impression on me. And my mom, like, being that she's from somewhere very different from the United States, I think she clearly wanted us to not be fully American. She wanted to bring a different sensibility and point of view. It was really easy for her to show us how privileged we were because of the poverty that existed, not only in Panama, but also in her home country in Ecuador. We would visit. Up until the age of 15, I was in Ecuador every year for the summer, which in itself is a privileged thing. Being able to see so much of the country, but it was never about keeping us away from the realities of the world. She's one of the most important persons still in my life. The impression that it leaves makes you kind of really solid in your values. And I don't tend to compromise. I tend to be very hard-headed when it comes to my worldview.
You're a global citizen, and there is this nomadic spirit. So thank you for sharing your childhood, because it's a complicated matrix of cultures. Where did you go to school?
The Pacific Northwest College of Art in Portland, Oregon.
Portland, Oregon.
I'm clearly also my father's son because rebellion creates a sense of journey, and I literally flung myself to the furthest possible corner of the country from Miami. Portland's a great city, and it's known for its progressive
thinking,
but it was very homogenized.
How did you see yourself in that homogeneity? Was there a place for you? Were you constantly defining who you are?
I constantly was defining who I was. And it's a little unfair to say it was fully homogenized because there is diversity there. There's a lot more people from different parts of the world there than there are here. And then, of course, there's indigenous peoples there also. But as far as like Latinidad, as far as like Caribbean, as far as like people of color, it was a small community there, multilingual. I've seen different parts of the world. And then you throw in the age that it was a little bit older than some of them. I loved every minute of it. If I did not get a solid A in the course, I felt like I was missing something. And it wasn't just about the A's, it was about earning that and doing really good work.
It's a prestigious art school.
I'm very proud of it. Their BFA program in itself is almost like a graduate program because they put you through a thesis process. You can take it very seriously there. I think it's created a solid foundation in how I've built my creative life afterwards, especially how I survived in the art world post-college.
How do you describe yourself now in your practice?
I use the word artist. For me, it's an all-encompassing word, something that I'm very proud of. It's clear where art schools have already been headed into an interdisciplinary way of thinking about art. And printmaking already in itself, for me, was a place of refuge from the other dominant mediums. And printmaking itself is open to process and collaboration. So for me, it's the foundation. But I quickly moved from a general fine arts degree to Intermedia. Intermedia essentially says, we're going to have you explore what you want to explore. And in your thesis, you bring these elements together. And Intermedia is also interested in theory and interested in contemporary conversations about how artists use different mediums to discuss these issues. Most competitive courses, the ones where like artists from all the different schools within the school come together, and the critiques were very rich. It was about ideas that we were learning and exploring and challenging ourselves with. So that idea of interdisciplinary, it's just the way I work.
Yeah, which is why you work in sound.
I work in sound.
And you do performance.
I do performance,
right?
Print, walking, teaching.
Your ability to walk and speak about contemporary work with references, both seen and unseen. I've been on your guided tours at PAM, Perez Art Museum Miami, and you're a master at that.
I like the word guide. I like the word educator, and I want to meet the audience halfway. And I like the audience that challenges me. So if there's a non-believer in contemporary art, and there are a lot of them out in the world, they're like my favorite kind of people, because we will have an agreement by the end of the 45-minute discussion. Speaking about the most randomest, most conceptual, driest work of art. Even if they're still walking away without liking the work, they're going to see it differently.
So what's your definition of contemporary art?
I'm a living artist who's working at the precipice of time, in the moment. Objects and work that is left behind are relics of those moments. And I'm fortunate to still make objects or images or ideas that tick time, that can be looked at by someone else and understood as a way of understanding the moment I lived through. And I try to bring in the world so it reflects my world, my community, my place. Right? Because I can't speak for New York, I can't speak for LA, but I can speak for Miami, I think, at this moment.
And we're happy that you are speaking for Miami. In your printmaking, what are some of the subjects that you're drawn to?
I love image making. I just love how over time, the most successful artists that we remember create an image that is just perfect and memorable. I strive for the immediate color and composition to bring in a feeling. Like I want someone to love what I do so much that they like yank it off the wall and take it home with them. Subject matter is landscape, history, and as someone in the contemporary moment, it has to include ecocide. So that's how I wrestle with using the destruction of beauty, which for me, it's the landscape, the planet we live on. Like, yes, there's possibilities of other Earths so far away. And perhaps there's someone like me there thinking about their beautiful planet, but this is my beautiful planet. This is my landscape. Nature is my religion. So it's work that is testifying about the injustices done to it. And ecocide is a new legal term because we live in a world of legal jargon. And it's sometimes the only thing that gets respect by certain powers that be. It is the word to describe this crime against humanity, which is the destruction of our environment in the various different ways, because it's a handful of companies that are doing the majority of the polluting and forcing us towards this uncertainty of climate change. And we're already seeing just the first echoes of it. As someone who lives in Miami and who sees the amount of hurricanes that are affecting the region and how the hurricanes have changed in the 30-something years that I've been thinking about hurricanes. And as someone who survived Andrew, that's a lot of the subject matter currently. But it is also queer history because it is still in the landscape. So I'm kind of all over the place in the sense that I'm trying to describe different facets of the landscape because it is also a social space. Even in the sound work, we don't just go to nature. We record the city too. It's both our planes of existence. So I am a city kid. As much as I want to think of myself as nature-oriented, I can't deny who I am. And it's both. The beauty of our city is that you could go to the bay in a neighborhood, and there's like public parks that sit at the foot of these bodies of water. And, it's both a completely manipulated landscape, but it still has all of the elements of South Florida. Right. You're in that urban space. You're like annoyed by the jet skis, but a dolphin or a manatee makes you forget all of that, or a parrotfish or a seahorse.
Are these monotypes that you produce, are they outcomes of your figurative work? You're going to do a body of work. How do you decide what it is that you're going to show?
What I love about the monotype is that it's the most painterly and loose of the printmaking techniques. So many techniques are process-oriented, and there's steps you have to really commit to an image to express it in copies of the original image. But with monotype, at best going to get two, and you're going to get one that's deep and one that's going to be ghostly. And it's an expression of the moment. And then sometimes I make more monotypes of the same image because I'm kind of obsessed with an image. Like I think the images that I made of the Gulf of Mexico being on fire in 2021, multiple news outlets had different images. They were all selling their helicopters. How could you just make one image of this catastrophe when you're kind of living in it real time and seeing all these different perspectives? And so I think I made like 10 over that period. And I'm still going back to it and making more because to me, like that's the epitome of describing what ecocide is. So it is about reproducing an image, but how I feel about the image at that particular moment.
You formed Archival Feedback when you just come back to Miami. What has that experience been for you?
Archival Feedback is a collaborative project with one of my longest running friendships, Emile Milgrim. We both grew up in the suburbs of Miami. I'm a couple years older, but when I moved out to Oregon, she moved out to Oregon, and we returned around the same time. And we were both kind of falling in love with Miami again. That's the way we saw our Archival Feedback working. I was really interested in ideas of fieldwork, honoring the time that you spend thinking and listening to the world. The neighborhood I moved into, so fortunate. Like at the time, my mom was able to rent this house from the original owner who bought it in the 60s. And so the rent was dirt cheap and we were able to live there 6 years. And it's half a block away from the bay, right off of the bay where biologists come and study the mating patterns of manatees. And it was before this kind of era of redevelopment. So now a lot of the houses that were there are no longer there. But in this 6-year period where we were spending time in this park by the water, it just became clear that we needed to document something. And I said, we should make a record. And she has had a record label for now over a decade. And so it was just an opportunity to produce something. So we started this journey of recording different aspects of our landscape. We brought in other artists to react to the recordings. And so that's an A side and a B side of a record.
You ended up living in Baywood. What sounds did you discover and record there?
First and foremost, bird sounds. Being that most of North Miami along Biscayne Bay is a bird sanctuary. Still is, even though I'm seeing less and less birds. So from being woken up in the middle of the night from a mockingbird who's nesting right outside my window, and they love to sing at 2 a.m, being revisited by the same cardinal over the 5-year period. And you see hawks, you see all sorts of bird drama, but also storm drains. This is the infrastructure that allows Miami to be at sea level. It is how the city has historically been able to handle rain and storm surge, even though storm surge is becoming more powerful. But this is how the city drains itself from all the water, because originally Biscayne Bay was Biscayne Lagoon. The Everglades that runs out the slow-moving river actually also ran out where Miami is, but into the lagoon, and all of that was reformed at the beginning of the city's history and dredging up the lagoon to build North Miami, raise up the city. And it's storm drains that allows the water to leave and funnel into the bay.
This is what our county talks about when they say they're opening the gates so that the water can go through. You know, I lived in Morningside for a long time, and during the heavy rains, we would really want the city to come and open the gateway to the bay to let the water out. So
this is an underground skeletal system, and with water trickling through them or the bay kind of hitting them, there's a base that is created, and that was one of our first recordings. And then we just kept going back to storm drains and at different points using different tools to record this water. And it becomes a metaphor, a symbol for the moment. It's been a project that has found a lot of audiences. We have a small but mighty following.
In 2018, you received an Oolite Creator Award, Archival Feedback Mangrove. What has this award meant to the trajectory of your work?
It was a validation, and it felt like Archival Feedback was on the right path, because essentially the project that we put forward was an archival feedback conceptual framing. And the work that we have done for Mangrove is so complex that we're still working it out. It kind of evolved into creating instruments, turning refuge garbage that we collected into objects that recorded light and sound. So the mangrove essentially became a stand-in for us as performers. And we were essentially trying to capture the experience of the tree in time. Part of the recording is the dawn and the dusk that the tree witnesses in the cycle of the day. The mangrove isn't just a barrier tree. Like all trees, it hosts life. And so some of the water recordings with the hydrophone capture the fish. It's magical. It's magical in a very abstract way. And then using technology, we essentially turned cans into photoreceptors. So that's how we recorded the dawn from the perspective of the mangrove. That's why it's a groove. The tree limb is kind of a stylus, the groove of the record, but the groove is also a reference to music and harmony.
You have a very personal and private practice, but you have a very public practice as well with the tours that you give in the Design District and at the Perez Art Museum Miami. As a member of the docent crew there, you are stellar in describing the history, but I think that I am proudest of your development of Pride Week at Perez Art Museum.
To fully describe it, PAM was closed for over 6 months during the pandemic. But when we reopened, all of the tours were outside because this was still the era of social distancing, and a lot of it could not be congregating in groups. So socializing shifted and changed. And I was actually very busy at that time giving tours outside, not just at the museum, but that's a lot of the work that I do in Wynwood and in the Design District. But June happened. There's multiple Pride Weeks in South Florida. And Pride is such an important event at PAM. And we could not have the big party that we usually have. Yeah. Literally thousands of people show up. And that could not happen in 2021. So since I work closely with Anita Bram and Marie Vickles in the education department, they asked me to do programming for Pride Month of June 2021. And I curated a roster of films that were crucial to my development. I grew up in the 90s, and there was a new wave queer cinema happening at the time. We did Watermelon Woman, films by Greg Araki, and music videos by queer artists. But the most important thing that I scripted was the Pride Tour that I've given twice a week ever since. The museum is committed to the tour, the voices and the language being used to talk about the reality of artists who are out. And essentially, Pride is an anniversary of an uprising. It is 53 years now, commemorating people realizing their power in face of injustice, moved by other social movements to become what is considered the most successful social movement in modern history in the United States. And it's been a very powerful conversation.
This was an Art of Black Miami podcast sponsored by the Greater Miami Convention and Visitors Bureau. I am Rosie Gordon-Wallace. We recorded this conversation in the historic neighborhood of Little Haiti, a mecca for Black art and culture. Art of Black Miami highlights the year-round art and culture scene in Miami's heritage neighborhoods and across communities in Greater Miami and Miami Beach. If you are enjoying our stories, visit artofblackmiami.com to learn more. Engage us on social media, post and share using the hashtag #ArtofBlackMiami. The Greater Miami Convention and Visitors Bureau is an accredited, independent, not-for-profit sales and marketing organization. GMCVB's mission is to attract visitors to Greater Miami and Miami Beach for leisure, business, and conventions. For up-to-date art events, promotions, and more information, visit artofblackmiami.com.